The air at the Abilene County Fairgrounds was so thick with heat you could drink it. It pressed down on the dusty ground, on the sad collection of a family's life spread across splintered tables, and on a man holding a baby where a prize-winning pig should have been. The auctioneer's voice was a relentless hammer, chipping away at what was left of the Bennett family ranch. Lot 24, household goods, assorted furniture, one crib, contents included. The man, Cal Bennett, flinched. His weathered hands, calloused from a lifetime of mending fences and working cattle, cradled the tiny baby wrapped in a faded blanket. He stood beside a cardboard box he'd been using as a crib, his face a mask of desperate exhaustion. The creditors had taken it all. The land his great-grandfather had settled, the cattle his brother had raised, the pickup truck that was the only reliable thing they'd had left. And now, in a cruel twist of legal jargon, they were auctioning off the right to raise this child. "This ain't property!" Cal's voice cracked, raw with sleeplessness and grief. He pleaded with the faces in the small crowd, faces that were either indifferent or hungry for a bargain. "She's my niece. She's all I got left." But the man with the gavel just shrugged. The foreclosure documents were ironclad. The guardianship papers were temporary. Without a home, without an income, Cal Bennett was deemed unfit, and the baby was just another asset tied to a defaulted loan. Whoever won the lot would be taking on the responsibility of the infant until the state could step in. It was a loophole, a cold, heartless loophole, and that's when I saw it. I just stepped out of the sweltering heat of my car, my own belly round with the child I was carrying, seeking a moment's distraction from the lonely quiet of my life. My name is Marianne Doyle, and I was a pregnant librarian who had no business being at a foreclosure auction. But when I saw that man's despair and the impossible vulnerability of that tiny baby, I made a decision. It wasn't a thought. It was a pure, unthinking impulse, an act that would throw a match on the carefully managed grief of my own life and set 3 futures ablaze. The auctioneer was about to slam his gavel down for a measly $50. $300! The words flew out of my mouth before I could stop them. Every head turned. The auctioneer's eyes widened. Cal Bennett stared at me, his expression a tangled mess of disbelief and a tiny, flickering spark of hope. I had just bought a man and a baby, and I had no idea what I was going to do with them. Before we dive back into this whirlwind, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You think this is a crazy start? You have no idea what's coming next. The dust of the fairgrounds hadn't even settled back on the cracked earth before I found myself driving down a county road with 2 strangers in my little Honda Civic. The baby, whose name I still didn't know, was asleep in a makeshift car seat we'd rigged up from a laundry basket and my purse strap. It was wildly unsafe, but it was better than the cardboard box. Cal Bennett sat stiff as a fence post in the passenger seat, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping under his skin. He hadn't said more than 2 words since I'd paid the cashier and he'd loaded his few remaining possessions, a duffel bag and 3 cardboard boxes, into my trunk. "Turn left up here," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "The mailbox has sunflowers painted on it." My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The morning sickness, which had been a dull roar all day, was now a churning sea of nausea. The adrenaline from the auction was gone, leaving behind the stark, terrifying reality of what I'd just done. I was a 42-year-old widow. I was 4 months pregnant with a miracle baby I'd long given up on, and I had just brought a homeless cowboy and an infant into my life. "Ma'am," Cal's voice was gravelly, rough. "I need you to know I'm good for what you paid. Every last cent. I'll work it off, I swear it." I risked a glance at his profile. The lines around his eyes were carved deep, telling a story of too much sun and not enough sleep. "It was $300, I said, "and my name is Marianne." 300. He said the number like it was a king's ransom. "I'll have it for you by the end of the month." I wanted to tell him to forget it, that the money didn't matter. It was a drop in the bucket from the life insurance my late husband David had left me. But I saw the fierce pride in the set of his jaw, the same stubborn independence David had carried like a shield, even in the face of his final illness. Some debts had to be paid, even if only in promises. It was about dignity. My farmhouse crested the hill, a simple white two-story with green shutters that needed a new coat of paint. It was surrounded by 20 acres of pasture I had no idea what to do with. I'd bought it 8 months ago, needing space to breathe after David died, a quiet place to raise the child growing inside me. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with good bones. David would have laughed. He'd always said I had a talent for seeing potential in things everyone else had given up on. "It's not much," I said, pulling into the gravel driveway, "but it's quiet." Cal got out of the car and moved to the back to get the baby, his movements so sure and practiced it was clear this wasn't new to him. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her tiny mouth making little sucking motions in her sleep. "What's her name?" I asked, fumbling with my house keys. "Sarah," he said, and his voice broke, just for a second. "Sarah Ann Bennett, my brother, Danny, and his wife, they picked it out." He stopped, cleared his throat. "She's 7 days old." 7 days. My heart squeezed. The front door stuck like it always did when it was humid. I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. The house smelled of the lavender I'd tucked in the closets and the lemon oil I used on the old hardwood floors. It was a good smell. A healing smell, I hoped. "Living room's through there," I gestured with my chin, dropping my purse on the kitchen counter. "There's a couch. You can lay her down." But Cal just stood in the doorway, his eyes sweeping the room, taking it all in. He was like a wary animal in a new territory, assessing every threat. He saw the mismatched furniture, David's old recliner, the bookshelves overflowing with novels. He saw the photos on the mantelpiece, my wedding picture, me and David smiling, young and clueless about the future, and the last picture I ever took of him, thin and pale in the hospital bed, but still smiling for me. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Cal asked, his gaze finally landing on me. "Taking in strangers, worlds full of folks who'd take advantage of a kindness like this." I pressed a hand to my belly, a small, firm curve that was just beginning to show. "I'm not sure about anything these days," I admitted. "But that baby needs a safe place, and you both look like you could use a hot meal." I opened the fridge. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had been bringing over casseroles ever since she found out I was pregnant. She was a saint. "I've got chicken and rice if you're hungry." I couldn't impose. "Cal." I turned and used my old schoolteacher voice, the one that stopped kids from running in the library. "That little girl is 7 days old. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" He looked down at the baby in his arms, whose tiny rosebud mouth was still dreaming of milk. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Yesterday morning, maybe the day before." My God, he was running on empty. "Sit," I commanded, "both of you." While I heated the food, he settled onto the couch, cradling Sarah against his chest. I watched him from the kitchen, noticing the way he instinctively supported her head, the way he adjusted his own breathing to match her tiny, rhythmic sighs. This wasn't a man fumbling his way through new fatherhood. This was a man who had been doing this from the very beginning. "You want to tell me what happened?" I asked, setting a plate of steaming food and a glass of sweet tea on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at the food like he didn't know where to start. "Danny was my younger brother," he began, his voice flat. "Him and Lisa, that's his wife. They wanted a baby for years. When she finally got pregnant, Danny was over the moon. Started building the nursery before she was even showing." He paused, shifting Sarah so he could eat with one hand. His movements were efficient, wasting no energy. "I was helping him run cattle on the family place. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Been in the Bennett family for 3 generations. I settled into David's recliner, my own plate balanced on my lap. The chair still smelled faintly of his aftershave. It was a comfort I wasn't ready to wash away. "What happened to them?" "Car accident," he said, not looking at me. 6 weeks ago, Danny was driving Lisa to her doctor's appointment. Drunk driver ran a red light, killed Danny instantly. His free hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist. They airlifted Lisa to Dallas. The doctors. They saved the baby, but Lisa, she only held on long enough to see Sarah born. She never left the hospital. The weight of it settled in the room, heavy and suffocating. I knew that weight. I had lived under it for a year. The sterile smell of hospitals, the beeping machines, the quiet, final slipping away of someone you loved. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. And I meant it. "The hospital bills wiped us out," he continued, forcing himself to eat. "Insurance didn't cover half of it. When I couldn't make the ranch payments, the bank moved in. They said without Danny's income, I was a risk. They took everything. The house, the land, the truck, everything." He finally looked at me, his eyes hollow. "The auctioneer said since my guardianship was temporary and I had no home, the state would put her in foster care. Said I could try to get her back when I was on my feet." He looked down at Sarah, whose little fist had worked its way free of the blanket. "I couldn't let her go into the system. A baby like her, she'd get lost." Now I understood. He wasn't just losing his home. He was losing the last piece of his brother, the last piece of his family. In that one impulsive bid, I hadn't just bought him a meal and a place to sleep. I'd bought him time. But time for what? "What's your plan now?" I asked gently. "Get work, find a place, prove to the courts I can provide for her." He met my eyes, and the pride was back, like steel reinforcing his broken spirit. "I won't impose on you, Mrs. Doyle. Soon as I can arrange something, we'll be out of your hair." "It's Marianne," I corrected softly. "And you're not imposing." Sarah began to make little mewing sounds, the universal signal for an impending feeding. "I've got formula in the truck," Cal said, starting to get up. "I'll get it," I said, standing carefully, my hand going to my lower back. "You stay with her." Outside, the air was cooling, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and the promise of rain. Cal's old borrowed pickup truck was filled with the remnants of his life. A duffel bag. Boxes marked "baby stuff" in neat block letters. And at the bottom of one box, I found something that made me stop cold. Wrapped in a soft flannel blanket was a small collection of library cards. They were from little towns all over Texas: Tyler, Lufkin, Amarillo. And on every single one, in familiar looping handwriting, was the name Marianne Doyle. My name. But they weren't my cards. I knew my own collection, tucked away in a shoebox in my closet. A strange habit I'd started with David, a way to feel at home in every new town we'd moved to. These were different cards, but the name was identical, and the handwriting wasn't mine. "Find everything okay?" Cal called from the front door. I held up the library cards, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Yes, but these have my name on them." His face went completely blank, a shudder coming down over his eyes. "Oh, those must have been Lisa's. Her maiden name was Doyle, Marianne Doyle." He tried to make it sound like a coincidence, but something in his voice was off. "Lisa Marianne Doyle," I said slowly, testing the name. I looked at the cards again. The handwriting was different, yes, but the strange, quirky habit of collecting them. It was exactly the same. Doyle isn't that common a name, not around here. And Marianne Doyle? The odds felt astronomical. "Could be we're related somehow," I mused, watching his face for a reaction. "Could be," he said, his voice flat. He turned back inside. "We should get that bottle ready. Sarah's about to get real loud." He was shutting it down. He didn't want to talk about it. And that, more than anything, told me this was no coincidence at all. What was he hiding? The peace lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of falling into a strange, quiet rhythm. Cal was a ghost in my house, taking up almost no space, his boots by the door, his voice a low rumble as he sang wordless lullabies to Sarah in the dead of night. It was a nice sound, a sound that pushed back against the crushing silence David's death had left behind. Then, on the 4th morning, the sound of tires crunching on my gravel driveway shattered the calm. I looked up from the sink to see a white sedan with official state plates. My stomach plummeted. A woman in a navy blue pantsuit got out, holding a clipboard like a weapon. "Cal!" I called out, my voice tight. "We've got company!" He appeared in the kitchen doorway, Sarah on his shoulder, his face already a mask of grim concern. He knew who it was before I even said a word. The knock on the screen door was firm, official. The woman's smile was professional and completely empty of warmth. Behind her, a sheriff's deputy stood with his hand resting casually on his belt. It was meant to be a relaxed posture, but it screamed intimidation. "Mrs. Doyle?" the woman said. "I'm Karen Walsh from Child Protective Services. This is Deputy Martinez. We need to speak with you about the infant residing in your home." My mouth was bone dry. I'd known this was coming. I just let myself pretend we had more time. "Of course," I managed. "Please come in." The living room suddenly felt tiny and cluttered. Miss Walsh's eyes scanned everything. The makeshift changing station on the coffee table, the drying bottles in the dish rack, the cardboard boxes still waiting to be unpacked. Her gaze was an accusation. "Mr. Bennett," she said, not looking at him, just at her clipboard. "We've been alerted to the irregular circumstances of your guardianship. The incident at the county auction has raised significant concerns about your ability to provide a stable environment for the child." "Sarah's fine," Cal said, his voice low and steady, but I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw again. "She has a roof over her head. She's being fed. She's safe." "The auction, Mr. Bennett," Walsh said, her tone icy. "You understand that attempting to sell a human being, even indirectly, is a serious matter? It calls your judgment into question." "Nobody was being sold." Cal's voice rose, and Sarah stirred in his arms, sensing his agitation. He lowered his voice, struggling for control. "I was trying to keep my family together when the law was tearing it apart." "Nevertheless," Walsh continued, turning her cold eyes to me, "Mrs. Doyle, while your actions may have been charitable, you are not a licensed foster provider. This is an unauthorized placement. Technically, you are breaking the law." Heat flooded my cheeks. I wasn't aware that compassion required a state license. "When it involves a minor child, yes, it does," she snapped. Then her tone softened, just a fraction. It was a calculated move. "Look, I can see the baby appears well cared for, but we have protocols for a reason, to protect children." Deputy Martinez, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What's the bottom line here, Karen?" Walsh didn't hesitate. "The bottom line is I'm here to take the child into state custody. She'll be placed with a licensed foster family while we conduct a full assessment of Mr. Bennett's fitness as a guardian. He'll be permitted supervised visits." The words were like a physical blow. Cal went rigid, his arms tightening around Sarah, as if he could shield her from the words themselves. "You want to take her away?" he whispered. "From the only family she has left? Mr. Bennett, you are homeless and unemployed. You have no verifiable support system. A newborn requires stability." "She has stability here," Cal shot back. "She has people who love her." "An arrangement that could end at any moment," Walsh said, gesturing around my living room. "Mrs. Doyle could ask you to leave tomorrow, and you'd be on the street with an infant. The state cannot allow that kind of uncertainty." That's when I found my voice. "What if I became a licensed foster parent?" I asked. "Would that change things?" Walsh barely glanced at me. "The process takes months. Background checks, home studies, training. In the meantime, the child needs to be in a secure placement. So you'll traumatize a 7-day-old infant by ripping her away from the only parent she's ever known?" I couldn't keep the fury out of my voice. "You call that being in her best interest?" Cal looked at me with a flicker of stunned gratitude. He had been fighting this battle alone for so long, he didn't expect to have anyone in his corner. "I am not the villain here, Mrs. Doyle," Walsh said, her professional mask slipping for a second. "I've seen what happens when good intentions aren't enough. Children fall through the cracks. I am trying to prevent that." "By creating the very trauma you claim to be preventing," Cal said, his voice quiet but intense. She knows my voice. She knows my touch. She settles for me. You put her in the arms of a stranger, and you tell me how that's helping her. The deputy shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Karen, the regulations allow for caseworker discretion in exigent circumstances. Maybe we could work out a temporary plan. Give these folks a chance to get the paperwork sorted. Walsh looked furious that he had challenged her, but the deputy stood his ground, pointing to a line in the folder she was holding. Section 12(4), In-Home Safety Plan. A silent war raged on Karen Walsh's face, bureaucracy versus humanity. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she relented. Fine, she snapped. But this is highly irregular. I will allow a 30-day temporary placement, under strict conditions. She laid them out like a prison sentence. Weekly home visits, proof of income. Cal had to find a job and a permanent residence, and I had to begin the foster licensing process immediately. 30 days, she said, her eyes boring into Cal. And then I'm back, and if you haven't met every single requirement, I will take that child, and there won't be a thing you can do about it. After they left, the house felt violated. The fragile peace was gone, replaced by the ticking clock of a 30-day deadline. 30 days, Cal said, his voice hollow. He sank onto the couch, Sarah still sleeping on his chest, oblivious. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded emotion. Why? He asked. Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. I looked at Sarah's perfect sleeping face. My husband and we tried for years to have a baby, I confessed, my voice thick. It never happened. I touched my own belly. This was a miracle we'd given up on. I guess I can't stand to see a child taken away from someone who so clearly loves her. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was choked. David was a lucky man. I was the lucky one, I whispered. We had 30 days. 30 days to build a life, to prove to the state that our strange, broken, makeshift arrangement was a real family, a home. But as I looked at the library cards still sitting on my counter, the ones with my name on them, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The state wasn't the only one who didn't know the whole story. I had a feeling I didn't either. And I was starting to suspect that Cal's secrets were far more dangerous than his poverty. The race was on. Cal found work faster than I thought possible, at the Double R Ranch, a place run by a grizzled old cowboy named Jim Morrison, who valued a hard worker over a clean resume. It was back-breaking labor from sunup to sundown, mending fences and herding cattle, but it was a paycheck. It was a start. My days fell into a new rhythm, one dictated by the needs of a newborn. Feedings, diaper changes, naps. I was running a daycare for one while trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze of foster care licensing. The orientation was a nightmare of fluorescent lights and condescending pamphlets. The social worker, a tired woman named Beth, made it clear that expedited was not in her vocabulary. The system is designed to be slow, she'd said. It's to protect the children. I was beginning to think the system was designed to break people. While Cal was at the ranch, I cared for Sarah. She was a good baby, mostly. She had fussy periods in the evenings, but she had this way of looking at you, her dark eyes so serious and focused, as if she was trying to memorize your soul. I found myself talking to her constantly, telling her about David, about the baby growing inside me, about the stories in the books that lined my walls. She was starting to feel like mine, and that terrified me. You're getting attached, my sister Linda said over the phone, her voice laced with concern. Of course I'm attached. She's a baby, I snapped, more defensively than I intended. That's not what I mean, and you know it, Linda pressed. Marianne, what happens when this is over? What happens if they take her away from him? From you? They won't, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. But the fear was a constant companion. Every time a car slowed down on the road outside, my heart leaped into my throat, thinking it was Karen Walsh, back early. One afternoon, while Sarah was napping, I took out the boxes Cal had brought from the truck, He'd told me they were mostly Lisa's things, that he hadn't had the heart to go through them. I told myself I was looking for paperwork that might help with the guardianship case, but I knew I was snooping. I was looking for answers about the library cards, about the woman named Marianne Doyle, who wasn't me. I didn't find any more library cards. Instead, I found a half-finished baby quilt. The pieces were cut from soft cottons in shades of pale yellow and mint green. The pattern was a complex star, with dozens of tiny, intricate pieces. Tucked in the box was a notebook. Lisa's handwriting, neat and precise, filled the pages. For our little miracle, the first page read, "Love, Aunt Lisa." Aunt Lisa. The words seemed to confirm Cal's story, but as I flipped through the notebook, I found more than quilting instructions. There were sketches, lists of baby names, and diary-like entries. March 15th. Felt the baby kick for the first time. Danny cried when I put his hand on my belly. He's going to be such a wonderful father. A pang of sadness hit me, for this woman I'd never met, for the family that had been shattered. But then I found something else. Tucked into the back of the notebook was a faded photograph. A smiling young woman with dark, curly hair, Lisa, I presumed, stood with her arm around another man. It wasn't the brother, Danny, from the other photos. It was Cal. They looked young, maybe high school age, and they were standing in front of a library. They weren't smiling like friends. The way he was looking at her, it was pure adoration, and on the back of the photo, in faded ink, was a single sentence. Someday, MD plus CB, MD Marianne Doyle, CB Cal Bennett. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a distant relation. This was something deep, something old, and Cal had lied about it. That evening, I decided to finish the quilt. It felt like the only way to get closer to the truth, to understand the woman at the center of this mystery. As I began piecing the fabric together, following Lisa's meticulous notes, I noticed something odd. Some of the fabric squares weren't cotton. They were a rougher material, like homespun linen, and on one of them, almost hidden in the pattern, was a tiny, embroidered symbol. It looked like a cattle brand, a single stylized letter T. When Cal got home that night, exhausted and covered in dust, I didn't mention the photograph or the brand. I just showed him the progress on the quilt. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lisa, she would have loved that you're finishing it." "I found her notebook," I said, watching his face carefully. "She was very organized." "Yeah," he said, looking away. "Lisa had a plan for everything. But she didn't plan on dying, did she, Cal? She didn't plan on leaving her baby in the hands of a man who was lying to everyone around him." A few days later, a visitor appeared at my door. An older woman, thin and frail, with haunted eyes and hands that trembled slightly. "I'm Eleanor Bennett," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm Cal and Danny's mother. I'm Sarah's grandmother." My heart stopped. This was the support system Walsh said Cal didn't have. "Cal never mentioned you," I said, my guard immediately up. "We've been estranged," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I had some problems after my husband died, but I'm better now. I heard what happened, about Danny and Lisa, and my grandbaby." She looked past me into the house. "Can I see her? Please? I need to see her." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She wept when she saw Sarah, clutching the baby to her chest with a desperate, hungry grief. She told me stories about her boys, about the ranch, about how proud she was of Cal for stepping up. "He's a good man, my Cal," she said, wiping her eyes. "Always taking care of everyone. Sometimes he takes on burdens that aren't his to carry." Her words seemed to have a double meaning, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of the house. She stayed for an hour, charming and heartbroken. But as she was leaving, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "I found this going through some of Danny's things," she whispered, her eyes full of feigned sympathy. "I think you have a right to see it. You're involved now." I unfolded it after she left. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a photo. It was a certified copy of a birth certificate. Sarah Ann Bennett's birth certificate. I scanned the document, my eyes searching for the names. Mother, Lisa Mary Ann Bennett, formerly Doyle. And under father, where I expected to see Daniel Bennett, or perhaps even unknown, was a name that made the world tilt on its axis. Father, Calvin James Bennett. The air rushed out of my lungs. My legs gave out, and I sank into a kitchen chair, the paper shaking in my hand. Uncle. He wasn't her uncle. He was her father. Every single thing had been a lie. The story of the devoted uncle, the family tragedy, the auction. It was all a carefully constructed fiction. And the worst part? I realized with a sickening lurch that his mother, Eleanor, hadn't just found this. She had brought it to me. She had delivered this grenade, disguised as a sad old woman, and pulled the pin right in the middle of my life. This wasn't a family tragedy. This was a conspiracy. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The sound of Cal's truck pulling into the driveway was like a death knell. He walked in, whistling softly, and stopped dead when he saw my face. His eyes flickered to the paper on the table, and every ounce of color drained from his skin. He knew. "Mary Ann," he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Don't," I said, my own voice like ice. "Don't you dare say another word to me." The confrontation was brutal. The truth came out in a torrent of angry whispered words because Sarah was sleeping in the other room, and the last thing I wanted was to scare her. An affair. He'd had an affair with his brother's pregnant wife. "It wasn't like that," he pleaded, his face a mask of agony. "Lisa and Danny, they were miserable. He was drinking, staying out all night. She was lonely, scared. And His voice broke. "I'd been in love with her my whole life, Mary Ann, since we were kids. The photo, MD plus CB someday." "She was carrying your child," I said, the words tasting like ash. "And you let your brother believe it was his." "No," he choked out. "We told him. Lisa couldn't live with the lie. We told him the truth 2 days before the accident." The pieces slammed into place with sickening force. The drunk driver, the red light. It wasn't just a random tragedy. Danny had gotten the worst news of his life and then gotten behind the wheel of a truck. Cal hadn't just lost his brother, he had handed him the bullet. "So you stood at that auction, a grieving father, not a grieving uncle," I said, my voice shaking with rage and betrayal. "And you let me rescue you. You let me bring you into my home, into my life, under completely false pretenses." "I was desperate," he cried, his own control finally shattering. "What was I supposed to do? Walk up to you and say, 'Hi, my name's Cal. I had an affair with my brother's wife. I'm the reason he's dead, and this is our baby. Can we crash on your couch?' You would have run screaming." He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make the deception any less poisonous. "Your mother was here," I said, my voice flat. "She's the one who gave me this." He looked like I'd slapped him. "My mother? Why would she?" "Because she wants the baby, Cal. She played me. She came here acting like a grieving grandmother. All the while she was planning to blow our lives apart so she could swoop in and claim Sarah." He stared at me, the wheels turning in his head. The lies were compounding, a tangled web of deceit, and we were both caught in it. "I need you to leave," I said, the words falling like stones into the silence between us. "Mary Ann, please, we can fix this." "No." My voice was final. "I can't look at you. I can't think with you in my house. Pack your things, pack Sarah's things, and get out." Watching him gather their few belongings was the hardest thing I'd ever done. He moved like a man in a dream, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He was a liar, a manipulator. He had used my kindness, my grief as a shield. But as he stood at the door, with his innocent daughter sleeping in her car seat, he looked at me with eyes so full of pain, it almost broke my resolve. "For what it's worth," he whispered, "everything I felt here, with you, it wasn't a lie. You saved us, Mary Ann. You were the only good thing that's happened to me in a year." Then he was gone. The silence that descended on the house was absolute. It was heavier, deeper than the silence after David died. That was the silence of loss. This was the silence of betrayal. I sank to the floor, my hand on my own growing belly. I had kicked out the man I was falling in love with. I had sent a baby out into the night with a man I couldn't trust, and the CPS hearing was in less than 2 weeks. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. And then I remembered the quilt, the strange symbol, the cattle brand, the letter T. My mind raced. Eleanor's visit, her perfectly timed revelation. It was too slick, too calculated. This wasn't just about a grandmother wanting her grandchild. This was about something else, something bigger, and I had a terrible feeling it had something to do with that brand. The next few days were a blur of numb misery. I called in sick to the library. I barely ate. I just sat in David's chair, staring at the walls, the silence of the house screaming at me. Then I drove to Dallas. My sister Linda opened her door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug without a word. I collapsed at her kitchen table and told her everything. The lies, the affair, the birth certificate, Eleanor. "He's a monster," I finished, my voice raw. "He used me." Linda, ever the pragmatist, listened patiently. "He lied, yes. What he and Lisa did was wrong. But Marianne, look at it from his side. He was a terrified new father, consumed with guilt, who thought the truth would cost him his child. Was his lie malicious, or was it an act of desperate protection?" I didn't want to hear it. I wanted her to confirm that he was evil, that I was the victim. "And your mother-in-law," Linda continued, her brow furrowed. "You said her name is Eleanor?" "Yeah, Eleanor Bennett. Hold on." Linda, who worked as a paralegal, typed the name into her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Court records, public filings. "Okay, this is interesting. Eleanor Bennett filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. And guess who bought up her debt for pennies on the dollar?" She turned the laptop toward me. The name on the screen made my blood run cold. Thorn Industries. "Thorn?" I whispered, my mind flashing back to the quilt, the embroidered brand, the letter T. "Who's Thorn?" Linda asked. "A rival rancher," I said, the pieces starting to click together in a terrifying new pattern. "When I asked Cal about him, he went white as a sheet, told me to stay away from that name." "Well, there's more," Linda said, her voice grim. "Jedediah Thorn, the owner of Thorn Industries, also happens to own the company that held the debt on the Bennett family ranch. He's the one who foreclosed on them." This wasn't a random foreclosure. This was a targeted attack. Thorn had been systematically dismantling the Bennett family for years. But why? And then the final piece fell into place. "Linda," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "can you look up the police report from the car accident? The one that killed Danny and Lisa?" She typed again. A few clicks and the report appeared on the screen. "Danny Bennett, deceased. Lisa Bennett, deceased. Other driver, Miguel Torres." Linda read the name, then paused. "Address on file. Works at Thorn Cattle Company." It wasn't a drunk driver. It was a hit. My whole body went cold. This was never just a custody battle. This was about land. This was about murder. Danny must have found out what Thorn was doing, how he was targeting their family. He was going to expose him, and Thorn had him silenced. And Eleanor, what was her role? Was she a pawn, or was she a player? Her perfectly timed arrival, the birth certificate. She wasn't trying to win custody. She was trying to make sure Cal lost, to make sure no Bennett ever had a claim on that land again. She was working for Thorn. She had sold out her own sons. I had to find Cal. I had to warn him. I found him at a dingy motel on the outskirts of town. He opened the door and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Sarah was in a portable crib, looking small and lost in the grim little room. "Marianne," he breathed, his face a mixture of shock and hope. "It wasn't an accident," I said, pushing past him into the room. "The crash, it was Thorn. He had Danny killed. I laid it all out for him. The debt, the foreclosure, the driver." He listened, his face hardening from despair into a cold, focused rage. The guilt he'd been carrying, The belief that he had caused his brother's death was replaced by the terrible certainty that his brother had been murdered. "And my mother," he whispered, the betrayal in his voice absolute. "She's working for him," I said. "She's been playing us from the start." We were no longer just two broken people fighting for a baby. We were standing in the crosshairs of a powerful, ruthless man who had already killed once to protect his secrets. And the CPS hearing was tomorrow. We knew what we had to do. We couldn't go to the police. Not yet. It was our word against a wealthy, influential man. We had no hard proof, just a string of damning coincidences. Our only chance was to use the hearing itself as a trap. The conference room at the courthouse felt like an arena. Karen Walsh sat at the head of the table, looking severe. On one side sat Eleanor and her slick, expensive-looking lawyer. She smiled at me, a viper disguised as a grieving grandmother. On our side, there was just me and Cal, with Sarah sleeping in her car seat between us. We looked like lambs to the slaughter. The hearing began just as we expected. Eleanor's lawyer painted Cal as an immoral, unstable degenerate who had betrayed his own brother. He used the affair, the lies, everything, to build a case that Cal was unfit to be a father. Eleanor wept crocodile tears, talking about her desire to give her only remaining family a good, moral home. It was a masterful performance. I could see Karen Walsh wavering. Our case was falling apart. Then it was our turn. Cal stood up. He didn't make excuses. He admitted to the affair, to the lies. He took responsibility. "I made terrible mistakes," he said, his voice clear and steady. "And I will live with them for the rest of my life. But none of that was Sarah's fault, and everything I have done since the moment she was born has been to protect her." Then he looked directly at his mother. "I just have one question for my mother," he said. "Eleanor, when you came to Mrs. Doyle's house, how did you know where she lived?" Eleanor froze. Her lawyer tried to object, but Walsh waved him to be quiet. I asked around," Eleanor stammered. "You asked around," Cal repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "That's funny, because Mrs. Doyle lives on a secluded property. No one even knew I was there. No one except my employer, Jim Morrison. And he tells me he's never spoken to you in his life." He let the silence hang in the air. "So I'll ask again. Who told you where to find us?" He took a step closer. "Was it the same person who paid off your gambling debts 2 months ago? The same person who bought the note on our family's ranch?" Eleanor's face went white. "I think you know a man named Jedediah Thorne," Cal said, his voice like thunder in the small room. That's when I stood up, holding the half-finished quilt. "And I think Mr. Thorne has a cattle brand that looks a lot like this," I said, pointing to the tiny embroidered T, "a brand that my late sister-in-law, Lisa, stitched into this quilt. Why would she do that, Eleanor? Was she trying to leave us a message? Was she scared of him?" Eleanor started to tremble. Her lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but it was too late. The trap was sprung. "And the man who was driving the truck that killed my brother and his wife," Cal continued, his voice relentless. "Miguel Torres. He worked for Thorne. Was that just a coincidence too? Or was my brother killed because he found out Thorne was systematically destroying our family to steal our land? Land that Sarah, as his only heir, now has a claim to." The room exploded. Eleanor's lawyer was shouting objections. Karen Walsh was banging her gavel. But then Deputy Martinez, the same deputy from that first visit, who had been standing quietly in the corner, pulled out his phone and made a call. "We might have a problem down at the courthouse," he said into the phone, his eyes locked on Eleanor. That's when she broke. A lifetime of weakness, greed, and bad choices came crashing down on her. "He made me do it!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at her lawyer, at the empty space where Thorne should have been. "Thorne! He promised me a cut. He said Danny was going to ruin everything. He said it had to look like an accident." The confession hung in the air, ugly and final. The custody hearing had just turned into a murder investigation. Karen Walsh stared at us, her face pale with shock. She looked at the confession she'd just heard, at the baby sleeping peacefully through the chaos, and at the two people who had walked into her office as suspects and were now the key witnesses to a crime. She picked up her gavel. "In the matter of the custody of Sarah Ann Bennett," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "given the extraordinary testimony we have just heard and the clear and present danger posed by other parties, I am granting immediate, sole legal and physical custody to her biological father, Calvin Bennett, and his partner, Marianne Doyle." She looked at us, and for the first time, her eyes weren't cold. They were filled with a kind of awe. "God help you both," she whispered. Then the gavel came down. It was over, but in so many ways it was just the beginning. 6 months later, the farmhouse was a joyful chaos of wrapping paper, baby giggles, and Christmas carols. Jedediah Thorne and his hired driver were awaiting trial for murder. Eleanor had taken a plea deal, her testimony against Thorne earning her a reduced sentence. Her greed had destroyed her, but in a strange way, it had set Cal free. The guilt he'd carried was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective love for the family he had almost lost. Sarah, now a determined 8-month-old, was pulling herself up on the coffee table, a tiny conqueror surveying her kingdom. I watched her from the couch, my own belly a magnificent 37-week globe carrying our son. Yes, our son. Cal and I were married 3 months ago, in the same courthouse where our lives had been turned upside down. Judge Martinez, the same man who presided over the adoption proceedings that officially made me Sarah's mother, performed the ceremony. He'd cried. We'd all cried. Cal was on the floor wrestling with the instructions for a wooden rocking horse. "This thing has more parts than a tractor engine," he grumbled, but he was smiling. "Auntie Linda is coming for dinner," I said, catching Sarah just as she tried to eat a red ribbon. "And your cousin Marcus." The word cousin still felt like a miracle. My family, his family, what was left of it, had blended into something new and strong. Linda's kids adored Cal. My parents, initially horrified by the story, now doted on their new son-in-law and granddaughter. On the mantel, a new photo sat beside the one of me and David. It was from our wedding day. Cal in his one good suit, me in a simple blue dress stretched tight over my belly, and Sarah between us, clutching both our hands. I hadn't taken David's photo down. He was part of my story, part of what led me here. The new frame didn't replace the old one, it just added to it. "She's standing!" Cal yelled, abandoning the rocking horse. As if on cue, Sarah let go of the coffee table, her face a mask of intense concentration. She took one wobbly step, then another, then a third, before plopping down on her padded bottom, a huge, gummy smile on her face. We both cheered like she'd just won the Olympics. Cal scooped her up, spinning her around. "That's my girl. Look at you, walking." Later, as we stood in the kitchen doing dishes, the house filled with the warm, happy noise of family, Cal wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his hands on my belly. Our son gave a little kick, as if to say hello. "Remember how quiet this house was?" I whispered. "I remember a woman at an auction who paid $300 for a couple of strays," he murmured into my hair. "Best investment anyone ever made." Through the window, snow was beginning to fall, big, soft flakes dusting the fields that had once been the source of so much pain. Now, they were just our backyard, a place where our children would grow up. It was a long and brutal road to get here, a road paved with lies and betrayal and heartbreak, but standing there in the arms of the man I loved, with our daughter's laughter echoing from the other room and our son waiting to join us, I knew one thing for certain. Some families aren't born, they're forged. In courthouses and farmhouses, in desperation and in hope, they're built on forgiveness, and they are stronger for having survived the fire. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. We share new tales of unbelievable twists and incredible resilience every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.